My phone lit up at 4 in the morning, and I almost ignored it. I thought it was a spam alert, maybe a weather warning. But it was the camera app, the one I'd installed in Grandpa's bedroom 3 weeks ago and hadn't thought about since. I sat up in the dark, clicked play, and my entire body went cold because there was my brother Donovan inside that room, going through Grandpa's things like he owned every inch of it. If this already feels familiar, if you've been the one carrying the family while someone else took everything, hit subscribe because you are exactly who this channel is for. Stay with me. My name is Camilla Miller. I'm 44 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And until 8 months ago, I genuinely believed that no matter how messy or painful my family was, we were still family. I believed that meant something. I believed it was worth protecting. I don't believe that anymore. But let me take you back. Because to understand what that footage showed me at 4 in the morning, you need to understand what kind of man my grandfather was. And you need to understand what kind of man my brother Donovan is. Because those two things, those two completely opposite truths, are what made everything that happened so devastating. Grandpa Clifton was 81 years old. He'd lived in the same house in East Nashville for 46 years, the same yellow kitchen, the same creaky back porch, the same smell of cedar and old coffee that hit you the second you walked through his front door. He was the kind of man who remembered every birthday without being reminded, who kept letters people wrote him in a shoebox under his bed, who still called me his Cammy even when I was standing in front of him at 44 years old, with reading glasses on my face and tired eyes. He was sharp. People underestimated him because he moved slowly and spoke softly, but his mind was still completely there. He knew exactly what was happening around him. He just chose kindness over confrontation, always. That was his way. His health had been declining for about 2 years. Nothing sudden, nothing dramatic. Just the slow, quiet unwinding that comes with age. His knees were bad. He got tired easily. He'd had one small cardiac event the previous winter that scared all of us. And after that, his doctor had him on a strict medication schedule. By 9 p.m. every night, those medications had him deeply, heavily asleep. He wouldn't wake up if you knocked over a chair in the next room. We all knew that. His doctors knew that. And apparently, so did Donovan. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I am the younger of 2 kids. Donovan is 4 years older than me, 48, broad-shouldered, easy smile, the kind of man who walks into a room and immediately makes everyone feel like he's doing them a favor just by showing up. My mother, Eleanor, always said Donovan had their father's charisma. She said it like it was the highest compliment she could give. She said it every chance she got. Donovan lived exactly 22 minutes from Grandpa Clifton's house. I know because I clocked it once, sitting in my car outside his building, trying to understand how a 22-minute drive was somehow too far for him to manage more than twice a month. I lived 34 minutes away, and I was there 4, sometimes 5 days a week. I'm not saying that to make myself sound noble. I'm saying it because it's the truth, and the truth matters, especially in a story like this one. The caretaking started small, a grocery run here, a doctor's appointment there, picking up his prescriptions from the Walgreens on Gallatin Avenue because Grandpa had stopped driving after his cardiac episode and didn't want to bother anyone. That was so like him. 81 years old, struggling to get to his own pharmacy, and still worried about being a burden to other people. I started rearranging my work schedule around his appointments. I'm a project coordinator, mostly remote, so I had some flexibility. I used every bit of it. Monday mornings, I'd check his medication organizer. Wednesdays, I'd bring dinner and stay long enough to make sure he actually ate it, because when he was alone, he'd sometimes just have crackers and call it a meal. Fridays, I'd handle whatever had piled up during the week. Bills, phone calls, the occasional plumbing drama that came with a 46-year-old house. My husband Marcus never complained, not once. He'd pack up the food containers himself sometimes, tell me to drive safe, ask me to give Grandpa his regards. That man has been my quiet backbone through everything, and I don't say that enough. But Donovan was a different story entirely. He had a real estate business that he ran with a partner out of a nice office in Brentwood. He drove a newer model Silverado. He went on fishing trips with his college friends twice a year. He had time, real, actual time. He just chose not to spend it on Grandpa Clifton. When I'd mention it, carefully, gently, the way you do when you're trying not to start a war, Donovan always had an answer ready. Business was hectic. He had a showing. His partner was out sick and he was covering. The excuses were always reasonable enough that I couldn't argue with any single one of them. But when you lined them all up together, month after month, what you got wasn't a busy man. What you got was a man who had made a quiet decision that this particular responsibility wasn't his to carry, and our mother Eleanor backed him up every single time. Eleanor was 71, still sharp, still very much the center of her own universe. She lived in a retirement community in Murfreesboro, about 40 minutes out. She visited Grandpa maybe once a month, always on a Sunday, always for exactly 2 hours, always leaving before dinner. And whenever I tried, gently, carefully, to bring up how much I was managing alone, Eleanor would tilt her head and say something like, "Connie, you've always been so capable. Donovan has a lot on his plate right now." That sentence. I heard some version of it my entire life. I was capable so I could be leaned on. Donovan was struggling so he needed to be protected. That was the family math I grew up with. And apparently it had no expiration date. What hurt most wasn't the workload. I loved being with Grandpa Clifton, genuinely. Those Wednesday evenings sitting at his yellow kitchen table, him telling me stories about Nashville in the 70s, me pretending I hadn't heard most of them 3 times already. Those evenings were something I'd give anything to have back now. What hurt was that Donovan got the title of grandson without doing any of the work. He'd show up on Christmas with a nice bottle of bourbon, and Grandpa's face would just light up. And I'd be standing right there, having spent 11 months holding that man's life together, watching my brother collect a warmth he hadn't earned. I never said anything. I just swallowed it. And I kept showing up, because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. But 3 weeks before that 4 a.m. notification changed everything, something small happened. Something that didn't feel small at the time, and turned out to be anything but. It was a Wednesday evening, same as always. I'd brought Grandpa Clifton a container of chicken soup because the weather had turned cold, and he'd mentioned his chest feeling tight. Nothing alarming, he said it himself, just the season changing. But I wanted him warm and fed, so I drove over after work with soup and cornbread, and settled in at that yellow kitchen table like I had 100 times before. We were talking about nothing important, some home renovation show he'd gotten hooked on, the neighbor's new dog that barked every morning at 6. Normal, easy conversation. And then, in the middle of reaching for his glass of water, he stopped. His eyes drifted toward the hallway. That particular look on his face, a little confused, a little embarrassed. I'd seen it before when he couldn't remember a name, or lost track of what day it was. "Kami," he said quietly. "Have you seen my watch, the silver one your grandma gave me?" I knew exactly which watch he meant. A slim silver Bulova that my late grandmother Dorothy had given him on their 30th wedding anniversary. He kept it in the small velvet pouch in his nightstand drawer. He didn't wear it anymore. His wrists had gotten too thin, he said, but he kept it close. He'd shown it to me once, held it up in the light like it was made of something more precious than metal. I told him I hadn't seen it. I helped him look, nightstand, dresser top, bathroom counter, the little dish by the front door where he kept his keys. Nothing. He wasn't panicked. That almost made it worse. He just got quiet in that way old people do when they've learned that making a fuss doesn't always change the outcome. "It'll turn up," he said, but his eyes stayed a little dim the rest of the evening. I drove home that night with a tight, uncomfortable feeling sitting right in the middle of my chest. I told myself it was probably just misplaced, that he'd moved it without remembering. It happened sometimes with his medication affecting his sleep. He'd do small things at night and not recall them in the morning. But then 4 days later, he called me. His voice was lower than usual, slightly hesitant. "Kami, I had $200 in the top drawer. I counted it last week because I was going to give you something for all the groceries you've been buying me." He paused. "It's not there." I sat very still on my couch when he said that. Marcus was in the kitchen behind me, and I didn't want him to hear the way my breath changed. Because something shifted in me in that moment, something cold and instinctive that I didn't want to name out loud yet. I told Grandpa I'd look into it. I told him not to worry. I hung up and sat there for a long time. I thought about who had access to that house. Grandpa had a spare key hidden under the ceramic pot by the back door. Old habit, been there for years. The whole family knew about it. I'd asked him to move it twice, and he'd smiled and said nobody was going to bother an old man's house. I thought about the watch, the cash, the timing, and then I thought about something specific. something I couldn't shake. 3 weeks prior, Donovan had stopped by Grandpa's house on a Tuesday evening. He'd mentioned it casually at a family group chat, something like, swung by to check on Gramps, he looked good. Everyone had responded with heart emojis. I'd responded with a thumbs up because what else do you say? But Grandpa had mentioned to me the next Wednesday, offhandedly, almost like a question, that he didn't remember Donovan visiting. He thought maybe he'd been too deeply asleep and dreamed it. At the time, I'd let it go. I wasn't letting it go anymore. That same night, after Marcus fell asleep, I went on Amazon. I ordered a small indoor security camera, the kind that connects to your phone, motion activated, automatic cloud upload. It arrived in 2 days. I installed it myself on a Wednesday afternoon while Grandpa napped, tucked it behind the books on his bedroom shelf, angled toward the nightstand in the closet. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell Grandpa. I didn't tell anyone. I just pointed it at the place where I was afraid to look. And waited. 3 weeks passed. Nothing triggered. No alerts, no motion notifications beyond Grandpa moving around his own room in the mornings. I started to feel the particular shame that comes with suspecting someone you share blood with. I'd lie in bed some nights and think, Camilla, you installed a camera in an old man's bedroom because you couldn't handle your own resentment toward your brother. What kind of person does that make you? I almost took it down twice. Almost. The night of November 4th, I went to bed early. Marcus had made pasta, and we'd watched something forgettable on television, and I was asleep by 10:15. Deeply asleep. The kind of sleep that doesn't leave room for anxiety or second guessing. My phone lit up at 4:03 in the morning. I felt it vibrate on the nightstand before I saw the screen. My first instinct, pure autopilot, was that something had happened to Grandpa. A fall. His heart. I grabbed the phone so fast I nearly knocked over my water glass. But it wasn't a call. It was the camera app. A motion alert. Footage ready to view. I sat up. Marcus didn't stir. The room was completely dark, except for the glow of my screen. I clicked play. The footage was time-stamped 11:47 p.m. The room was dark, but the camera's night vision made everything visible in that gray-green tint. Grandpa Clifton was in his bed, completely still, deeply asleep the way he always was after his evening medication. And there, moving quietly along the far wall, was Donovan. My brother, in his jeans and dark jacket, moving through our grandfather's bedroom like he'd done it 100 times. Comfortable, unhurried. He went straight to the nightstand first, opened the top drawer, felt around inside, closed it. Then the dresser. He tried the second drawer, then the third. Then he turned toward the closet. I watched him pull out the small metal lockbox that Grandpa kept in the back corner of his closet shelf, the one with the combination lock. Donovan turned it over in his hands, tried the lock twice, then set it aside, frustrated but not panicked, like a man making a mental note to come back with a plan. Then he crouched down beside the nightstand again, reached behind it, feeling along the baseboard, and he found something I didn't even know was there, a small folded envelope tucked between the nightstand and the wall. He opened it, counted whatever was inside, pocketed it. Then he left, quiet as he came. The whole thing lasted 4 minutes and 18 seconds. I sat in my dark bedroom and I did not move for a very long time. Marcus was breathing steadily beside me. The house was completely silent, and I just sat there with my phone in both hands, watching those 4 minutes and 18 seconds again and again. When my hands started shaking, I finally put the phone down on my lap and pressed both palms flat against my thighs, just to feel something solid. Then I did something I almost didn't do. I went back through the older footage, the stored recordings from the past 3 weeks, motion events I hadn't checked because nothing had seemed urgent. I scrolled back through the thumbnails with my heart hammering against my ribs. He'd been there before, 4 other times. October 14th, October 19th, October 23rd, October 29th, always between 11 p.m. and midnight, always when Grandpa was deep in medication sleep, always moving through that room with the same quiet, practiced confidence. On the October 23rd recording, I found the watch. Grandpa's silver Bulova. Donovan picked it up from the nightstand. It must have been sitting right there in plain sight, turned it over once, and slipped it into his jacket pocket without a single moment of hesitation. Not a flicker of guilt, not 1 second of pause. Just pocketed it, like it was already his. I pressed my hand over my mouth in the dark, and I sat with that image until my eyes burned. Because this wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't someone who'd stumbled into a bad decision under pressure. This was calculated. Repeated, patient. My brother had been walking into our grandfather's home, using that spare key we all knew about, waiting until an 81-year-old man was helpless with sleep, and taking from him, quietly, systematically. And he had looked every single one of us in the face and smiled like he had nothing to hide. I didn't sleep again that night. I lay back down beside Marcus, but my eyes stayed open, fixed on the ceiling, my mind moving fast and cold in a way I hadn't felt before. Not panic. Something quieter than panic. Something that felt almost like clarity. By 5:30 a.m., I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. I downloaded every single clip, saved them to my laptop, uploaded them to my Google Drive, emailed them to a folder I created just for this. 5 recordings, names, dates, timestamps. I was not going to let there be any version of this where the footage mysteriously disappeared or got questioned. Marcus came downstairs at 6:45 and found me sitting there. He took one look at my face and sat down across from me without saying a word. That's the thing about a good man. He knows when to wait. I turned the laptop toward him and pressed play. I watched his face as he watched the footage, saw the moment it registered, his jaw tightened, his eyes went still. When it finished, he sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly through his nose. "How long have you had this?" he asked. "Since 4 a.m., I said. He nodded, quiet for a moment. Then, "Who else knows? No one yet." He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "Okay," he said. "What do you need?" I told him I needed to call my cousin Teresa. Teresa Broward was 51, sharp as a tack, and had worked as a paralegal for a civil attorney in Knoxville for over 20 years. She wasn't a lawyer herself, but she knew how these things worked. Documentation, legal exposure, elder financial abuse statutes. If anyone could tell me what I was actually holding in my hands and what to do with it, it was Teresa. I called her at 7 a.m. She picked up on the second ring because Teresa has always been an early riser, and also because she could hear something in my voice before I'd said more than her name. I told her everything, sent her the clips while we were on the phone, listened to her go completely silent as she watched them. "Camila." Her voice was careful, deliberate. "This is elder financial abuse. In Tennessee, that is a Class C felony if the value crosses a certain threshold. And even if it doesn't, this is serious." I knew it was serious, but hearing Teresa say it out loud in her paralegal voice made my stomach drop all over again. Then she said something that stopped my blood cold. "Let me look into a few things. Can you give me the name of Clifton's attorney?" I gave her the name, Gerald Whitmore, an estate attorney Grandpa had used for years, a quiet older gentleman with an office on Charlotte Avenue. I'd met him once at a document signing 2 years ago. Grandpa trusted him completely. Teresa called me back in less than 2 hours. Donovan had already contacted Gerald Whitmore's office 2 weeks ago. He'd called and told the receptionist that Grandpa Clifton wanted to update some beneficiary information and that he, Donovan, the grandson, would be coordinating on his behalf. He had scheduled a private meeting with the attorney for 3 days from now, Thursday at 2 p.m. Grandpa knew nothing about it. I was certain of that before Teresa even finished her sentence, but I needed to hear it confirmed. I drove to Grandpa's house that same morning, didn't call ahead, just showed up with a box of his favorite glazed donuts from the place on Woodland Street and sat down with him at that yellow kitchen table like it was any other visit. We talked for a while, easy conversation, and then, gently, carefully, I asked him if he'd been in touch with Gerald Whitmore recently, if he'd asked anyone to contact his attorney on his behalf. Grandpa looked at me with those steady gray eyes, thought about it genuinely, the way he always did before answering. "No," he said slowly. "I haven't talked to Gerald in months." "Why?" I kept my face calm. I reached over and patted his hand. "Just making sure everything's organized," I said. "You know me," he smiled. "My Cammy, always on top of things." I smiled back. And underneath that smile, I was absolutely furious. Because Donovan hadn't just been stealing watches and cash. He'd been setting up something much larger. He was moving toward that lockbox. Moving toward the will. Moving toward whatever Grandpa had spent 81 years building. Slowly, carefully, the same way he moved through that bedroom at midnight. Patient, deliberate, calculating. And he had 3 days before that attorney meeting. I had less than that to stop it. I called Gerald Whitmore's office the moment I got back to my car. I sat in Grandpa's driveway with the engine off and asked the receptionist for an urgent appointment. Same day if possible. I told her it was regarding Clifton's estate and that there was a situation she needed to make the attorney aware of immediately. Something in my voice must have communicated the weight of it because she put me on hold for less than a minute and came back with a 3 p.m. slot. I drove straight there. Gerald Whitmore was a small, careful man in his late 60s with reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose and a way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being filed and cataloged in real time. I sat across from his desk and I laid everything out. The footage, the dates, the watch, the cash, the lockbox, the phone call Donovan had made to this very office 2 weeks ago without Grandpa's knowledge. I slid my laptop across his desk and let him watch the clips himself. He watched all 5 without speaking. When the last one finished, he took his glasses off, set them down on the desk, and pressed 2 fingers against his lips for a long moment. "Miss Miller," he said finally, "I owe you an apology. My office should have verified directly with Clifton before scheduling anything. That was an oversight, and I take full responsibility for it." "I'm not here about the oversight," I told him. "I'm here to make sure that meeting Thursday never happens." It didn't happen. Gerald canceled it within the hour and flagged the interaction in Grandpa's file. He also told me quietly, in the careful, measured language of someone who has seen this before, that what I'd shown him warranted reporting to Adult Protective Services, that this pattern of behavior had a name, elder financial exploitation, and that the documentation I had was exactly the kind of evidence that mattered in these situations. I thanked him. I sat in my car afterward and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. Then I called Eleanor. I want to be honest about why I called her first before confronting Donovan directly. Part of me, some stubborn, exhausted part that had been a daughter her whole life, wanted my mother to be different this time. Wanted her to hear what I had to say and respond like a mother should. Like a woman who loved her father and her granddaughter, and the truth more than she loved her comfortable version of Donovan. I told her everything, calmly. Walked her through every recording, every date, the attorney situation, all of it. The line was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then Eleanor said, and I will never forget this as long as I live, "Camilla, are you sure you're not reading too much into this? Donovan loves Grandpa. He would never." Something in my chest just snapped, quietly, like a thread pulled past its limit. "Mom," I said, "I have him on camera. 5 times. Taking things." "Cameras can be misread," she said. "You don't know what Donovan was doing there. Maybe Grandpa asked him to get something." "Grandpa didn't know he was there." "Well," a pause. "You've always been hard on your brother, Cammy." I hung up. Not in anger. I was past anger by then. I hung up because there was nothing left in that conversation worth staying for. Because my mother had just looked at 5 recordings of her son stealing from her 81-year-old father and decided the problem was my attitude. I sat with that for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I called Donovan. I kept my voice completely even, told him Grandpa wanted a family gathering at the house Saturday afternoon. Casual, no big deal, just wanted everyone together. Donovan said sure, easy, no problem. That relaxed voice he used when he thought everything was under control. Saturday came. Marcus set up the television in Grandpa's living room while I got Grandpa settled in his armchair with his coffee. Teresa drove in from Knoxville. She sat near the window with her arms folded and said nothing. Donovan walked in at 2 p.m. in a good mood, jacket, easy smile, a 6-pack of Grandpa's favorite ginger ale in his hand, like he was arriving at a cookout. He looked around the room, me, Marcus, Teresa, Grandpa in his chair, and something shifted slightly in his expression. Just slightly. Not enough for him to act on, just enough for me to see. "What's going on?" he said lightly. I picked up the remote. "Sit down, Donovan." He sat, still smiling, performing calm the way he always had. I pressed play. The television filled with night vision footage. Timestamp, October 14th, 11:52 p.m. Donovan moving through Grandpa's bedroom like a shadow. The smile left his face in slow motion. I watched it go, the ease draining out, something harder and more desperate replacing it underneath. Nobody spoke. The only sound in that living room was the faint ambient noise of the recording and Grandpa's quiet breathing from his armchair. When the October 23rd clip reached the moment Donovan pocketed the silver watch, Grandpa's silver bulova, Dorothy's anniversary gift, I heard a sound from the armchair I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It wasn't a gasp, it wasn't a cry, It was just a small, soft exhale, the sound of an old man understanding something he never wanted to understand. Donovan shot to his feet. That is not, you're taking that completely out of context. Sit down, Marcus said. Quiet. Final. Donovan sat. I was just, Grandpa asked me to check on some things. Grandpa didn't know you were there, I said. He told me himself. You're twisting, Donovan. My voice didn't shake. I surprised myself with how steady it was. I have 5 recordings. I have your call to Gerald Whitmore's office. I have dates and timestamps, and a paralegal sitting right there who has already documented everything. So I need you to stop. The room went completely silent. And then Grandpa Clifton spoke. Grandpa Clifton's voice was low, unhurried, the way it always was. Soft at the edges, but completely solid at the center. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. He looked at Donovan for a long moment first. Just looked at him. The way only an old man can look at someone. With the full weight of everything he's lived and everything he's seen and every version of that person he has ever loved sitting right behind his eyes. Then he said, I kept that watch because your grandmother picked it out herself. She stood in that jewelry store for 2 hours because she wanted it to be right. He stopped, took a slow breath. I wasn't going to give it to anyone, Donovan. I was just going to keep it, because it was hers. That was all he said. 8 sentences. And every single person in that room felt them land like stones dropping into still water. Donovan opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in his life, he had absolutely nothing to reach for. No charm, no excuse, no version of events that could survive what was on that screen. He looked at Grandpa, really looked at him, and whatever he saw there finally broke through whatever wall he'd been standing behind. His face crumpled for just a moment, one unguarded second where something real came through. Then he stood up, walked past all of us, and left without another word. The front door didn't slam. That somehow made it worse. The room stayed quiet for a while after that. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. Teresa looked out the window, and Grandpa sat in his armchair with his coffee going cold in his hands, staring at the place where Donovan had been sitting. In the weeks that followed, Gerald Whitmore worked with Grandpa to do a full review of his estate documents. Donovan was removed from the will entirely. Grandpa made that decision himself, clearly and calmly, without any pressure from me. Gerald documented his full cognitive clarity at the time of the change, a precaution that mattered, because Donovan did hire a lawyer briefly. That lawyer sent one letter. When Teresa responded with the full documentation package, recordings, timestamps, the unauthorized attorney contact, all of it, we never heard from him again. The Adult Protective Services report was filed. An investigator came to Grandpa's house, sat with him gently, asked careful questions. Grandpa answered every one with complete clarity and quiet dignity. The investigation moved forward. I don't know exactly where it landed legally. Those things take time, and I deliberately kept some distance from the process to protect my own peace. But it was on record. Officially, formally, permanently on record. Eleanor called me twice in the month after the confrontation. The first call I let go to voicemail. She said I had humiliated Donovan in front of the family, and that I needed to consider what I had done to her son. Her son. Not a word about her father sitting in that armchair watching himself be stolen from. The second call I answered, I let her finish. And then I said, Mom, I protected Grandpa. That's all I did. If that's something you can't support, I understand. But I'm not apologizing for it. She hasn't called since. I won't pretend that doesn't hurt. It does. It probably always will. Because there is a particular kind of grief that comes from finally seeing your mother clearly. Not as the woman you needed her to be, but as the woman she actually chose to be. That grief doesn't announce itself loudly. It just sits with you quietly, shows up in small moments when you least expect it. But here is what else sits with me. Grandpa Clifton passed 4 months after that Saturday afternoon. It was a Thursday in early March, cold and gray outside, and he went quietly in his own bed in that house he'd lived in for 46 years. His affairs were in order. His wishes were documented and protected. Nobody had taken anything else from him in those final months. Not his money, not his dignity, not his sense of who he could trust. I was with him the week before he passed. We sat on that creaky back porch even though it was cold, because he said he wanted to hear the birds. I wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, and we just sat there together, not saying much of anything. At one point, he reached over and patted my hand the way he always had, slow and warm and certain. "My Cammy," he said quietly. "You were always the one who showed up." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just held his hand tighter. That was the last real conversation we had. I think about it every single day. I haven't spoken to Donovan since he walked out of that living room. I haven't spoken to Eleanor in months. The silence where my family used to be is something I'm still learning to live inside of. Some days it feels like loss. Some days, more and more lately, it feels like the first clean air I've breathed in years. I showed up for Grandpa Clifton when it mattered. I protected him when no one else was paying attention. I sat on that cold back porch and listened to him talk about birds, and I held his hand until he didn't need me to anymore. And when I had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping him safe, I chose him every single time. I don't need Donovan to admit what he did. I don't need Eleanor to apologize. I don't need the family to understand or agree or come around. I used to think I did. I don't anymore. Some people show you who they are slowly, over years, in small, quiet moments you almost miss. And some people show you all at once, in 4 minutes and 18 seconds of night vision footage at 4 in the morning. Either way, once you've seen it, and you don't have to keep pretending you haven't.